Tonight's the night. It's gonna happen again. It's gonna keep happening. It has to. As long as they keep churning out new series. This is it, guys. The show we never asked for, but maybe it could be the show we never realised that we needed. We thought we knew everything about Dexter's past. We thought wrong. This is Cliche Corner. I'm Gareth and you're listening to Dissecting Dexter. Or Dissecting Dexter, the Original Sin edition. At least I hope you're still listening. Let me extend the warmest of welcomes to all of you. It really is an absolute pleasure to be back talking to you about new Dexter. And we didn't think it would happen again, did we? Whether you're an old listener or new, I hope you'll join me each week as we break down and analyse this new series, Dexter Original Sin, featuring our favourite socially awkward serial killer. Actually, if you're a new listener, an extra warm welcome to you. Welcome aboard. I'm Gareth. I usually talk to you from my home in the heart of Yorkshire, England, but as we go along, logistics and schedules may force me to go out on location and record from the mobile studio. And if you ever happen to go back and check out old episodes from the original series, and I hope you do, you'll find that I did that a lot. But today, I'm waffling from the comfort of my home on a grey December day. The house, though, is looking very festive as we're all set for Christmas. My last day in the office is this coming Thursday, the 19th, and I'm looking forward to a couple of weeks away from work and enjoying some good quality downtime and family time and Original Sin, but that goes without saying, doesn't it? Again, for the benefit of new listeners, my format is that I go through the latest episode, often but not always scene by scene, occasionally with a guest to get a good conversation going, bit of back and forth. We break down the storylines and character developments, theorise, reminisce, make callbacks and comparisons, the whole 9 yards. Then we get into listener feedback. We've got a great community around the podcast, and I can't wait to hear from old friends what they think about this new show, and also hopefully hear from new feedbackers. My commitment to you is that if you send something in, I'll respond on the podcast. And if you're new, I encourage you to go back and check out some of the older podcasts. We've got episodes covering every season except season 4, Trinity, but I'll be getting to that after Original Sin ends. There are also a few interviews. I've been lucky to talk to David Zayas, Josh Cook, Scott Reynolds and Mark Pellegrino more recently, and I hope to get more in the future. If you like what you hear, maybe you'd consider supporting the podcast by leaving a nice review on iTunes or whichever podcast app you use, Spotify or wherever. That always helps. Or, if you want to go a step further, you could subscribe on Patreon and help keep the lights on, or more specifically help cover the cost of producing the show and hosting it somewhere professional. You can support for as little as £1 a month, or whatever you feel happy with. Hop over to patreon.com/dissectingdexter if you want to do that. A little perk of subscribing is that you have access to the Patreon exclusive Dissecting Dexter shortcuts, shorter podcasts just for patrons. They could cover anything. Perhaps something came up on a rewatch podcast that I couldn't discuss for spoiler reasons. I'll chat about it on a shortcut. We've had a little catch-up podcast where I talked about what horror movies I'd been watching for Halloween season. And we had some Original Sin update podcasts in the build-up to this season. Oh, and there's a free video version of my interview with Mark Pellegrino that I did in September. Mark played Paul Bennett in seasons 1 and 2. And there'll be more in the future, more shortcuts. Indeed, I'm open to suggestions if anyone has a question or a topic they'd like me to chat about. Email dissectingdexter@gmail.com or message me through the Patreon page. Oh, I mentioned spoilers. This is a spoiler-free podcast. I don't know anything about what's coming beyond what we've seen in the official trailer. I hate spoilers. I want to be surprised as things unfold. I don't want any I don't want any spoilers to influence my analysis and theories as we talk about each episode. I won't be spoiling you guys either, so if you want to be surprised too, you're safe here. We talk about what's come before, but not what's yet to come. So here we are at the start of a new journey with Dexter. We've gone back to 1991. Dexter's 20 years old and about to graduate and begin a career with Miami Metro Forensics. Something we know he will be very good at. Very, very good at. And that's not all he's good at. Just not yet. He's a fledgling killer and has yet to hone his craft, and I think this series will show us how he did it. But at what cost to himself, and more importantly, his family. Let's not waste any more time and get into the episode. We are talking Dexter Original Sin, Episode 1, and In the Beginning. Original air date, the 13th of December 2024, directed by Michael Lehman, and written by showrunner Clyde Phillips. So here we go with the first surprise of the series, at least for anyone who hadn't seen the trailer, and probably an earth-shattering shock for anyone who didn't know about Resurrection coming next year. Wow, can you imagine? Anyone who doesn't read the press around the show and went into this completely blind. Actually, I envy them. How amazing would it have been if they'd kept Resurrection a secret, had no idea, and had no Michael in the trailer, and this opening scene was the first we knew that Dexter survives New Blood. Holy cow. Maybe we'd have broken the internet again. Anyway, we knew this was coming, but the upshot is that Dexter survived Harrison's bullet, for better or worse. I think the jury's out on that amongst the fan base. We might assume it's Angela driving him to the hospital, although we don't see her. Maybe she'll be back for the new series next year. In the emergency room, they mention catastrophic blood loss, which you'd expect, but it reminded me of the original series when Kid Dexter had an accident and needed to be given blood. It was revealed then that he has a rare blood type, and Doris Morgan said to Harry that they should get in touch with Dexter's biological dad to see if he could donate blood. On the table, Dexter goes into arrest, but they bring him back, and in voiceover, Dexter makes a humorous comment. A heartbeat. I'll take it. Interesting that he wants to live now. Last we saw him, he was encouraging his son to kill him, like he'd given up on life. He'd failed in his mission to become more normal and human, failed to protect his son from the darkness, knew he brought calamity to anyone he cared for. He was done. Seems like he changed his mind and is keen to grab hold of whatever thread of life he can. I did love how the letters on the emergency sign blinked out to just read Emerge. Really nice touch. As Dexter says, it's true, your life flashes before your eyes. And so this is our entry into Original Sin. Dexter at death's door, now not wanting to go through, and looking back on his young life. Will the series end with us going back to the emergency room with Dexter, like present-day bookends? The consensus amongst the fans seems to be that it probably will. We first see his birth and his mother naming him. Nice in a way, but if your life flashes before your eyes, does that include stuff before we're old enough to make permanent memories? Do you know anyone who can recall coming out of the womb? It's okay, I won't get hung up on this. The doctor records the time of birth, and it's funny to note the date is February the 1st, 1971, which is Michael C. Hall's actual birthday. I love that little detail. Some interesting new artistic flourishes already. Stuff we've not seen in Dexter before. The images projected onto the car window when Dexter's lying on the back seat. The pulling back from Laura on the hospital bed like we're drawing back down a tunnel. The thing with the emergency sign. We immediately had a fresh look in New Blood, a new aesthetic, and I like that they're trying some new things here, some new tricks. And we go into the opening titles. The familiar shot of the mosquito, but on a new arm, a younger arm, and best of all, Dexter misses when he slaps it. Awesome. To me, this symbolises a new Dexter, younger, rough around the edges, not sharp. The titles are great. involving Harry and Deb too, not just Dexter getting ready for his day. Anyone who heard my Original Sin pre-season podcasts will know that I was unsure about the casting of Patrick Gibson, although I was willing him to nail it. But these opening credits, when he lies back in bed and looks up at us and gives that wry smile, I thought, oh yes, this kid's got something. I won't break down every image. We've all seen it, but I really like them, although I do remember thinking they've got a lot of producers on this show. A lot of names there. We join 20-year-old Dexter in class at university. Anatomy class maybe, but there's a cadaver for him to dissect. He remarks in voiceover that this is the first dead body he's touched, which surprised me. But he's really kind of intimate with it. He's doing pre-med, and we see later in the episode that he's about a week from graduation. We do see him graduate, his graduation ceremony, so how has he gone through the entire course only to work on his first cadaver right at the end? If there's anyone listening who's done pre-med, perhaps you can confirm when you get to start working on bodies like this. Is it right at the end? I'd be surprised. I'll admit, it's another nitpick. We hear one of the students in the room calling him a freak. And, well, when you see how he almost caresses the body. Is that fair comment? But Dexter's obviously stood out at university as someone very different, and he's seemingly had to deal with some ridicule. Dexter's face, though, he is, isn't he? He's relishing this moment, and he lovingly picks up a scalpel and starts to cut. He's disappointed at the lack of blood, though. I guess they drain cadavers of blood before they go off to be used in medical science. But he doesn't look overly impressed when he holds up that pale, dry heart. Not surprisingly, we're joining him at a point in his life before he's made his first human kill. He's maybe trying to find something, anything that will scratch that itch. And we'd learned that it was Harry's hope that they'd find something to fulfill Dexter's needs without him having to kill someone. He tells the university teacher that he didn't feel anything, which only confirms that simply handling a dead body isn't going to do it. There's a nice fade to Dexter having what looks like a graduation photo, and the photographer asks him to smile. He had this weird look on his face, and it's funny when she says, think of something that makes you happy. So he pictures the book American Psycho, and this dark smile spreads across his face.
Dissecting Dexter.
I kind of have a thing about blood.
We cut to our first crime scene of the series. We recognise actor Alex Shimizu as a young Vince Masuka taking photos of dead victims, a whole family murdered. It's a really grim scene. Patrick Dempsey turns up, Captain Spencer, and he's a potty mouth. Actually, I thought some of his expletives came across a little bit forced and a bit too much. He doesn't have Deb's penchant for creative swearing. The Miami Metro gang is here. Harry Morgan, of course, played by Christian Slater, and Tanya Martin, aka Buffy herself, Sarah Michelle Gellar, who asserts herself immediately, controlling the crime scene for forensics before the detectives can have free rein. We catch a glimpse of a very canny young Angel Batista, played by James Martinez. He really looks the part. And Bobby Watt, played by Reno Wilson. Triple murder and robbery. Single perp, they think. Harry does a nice little bit of detective work and they find a print. We know from previous seasons that often Dexter has his thing to deal with, the A story, while Miami Metro are kept busy with their own case, the B story, and often the two will link up at some point. I was thinking here, is this the B story, or is this going to feed into something for Dexter to do? Maybe they catch the perpetrator, have to let him go on a technicality, he fits the code, and Dexter goes on a hunt to kill him. We pay our first visit to the Morgan house. Evidently, Doris has already died some time ago, and we meet Molly Brown as Deb for the first time as she, Harry, and Dexter have dinner. I love this scene, primarily because how good I thought Molly did at delivering her lines. More than once, I thought, wow, that's exactly how Deb would say that. Most of all, when Harry says he's happy for her to go to the party and she looks at him and says,
"Seriously?"
Her expression and the way she says it, I just thought, that's Jennifer, that's Deb. Throughout the episode, I don't think Molly's doing a Jennifer impersonation as such, but you can see she's making an effort to capture some of her cadence. I have to say I was impressed. Harry wants Dexter to go to the party with her and keep an eye out, but we get a sense that Deb was hoping for some independence and not having Dexter there as a ball and chain. After she has her strop and storms out, Dexter and Harry have a chat about how he cut up a body in class. Harry's disappointed Dexter didn't feel anything and still feels hungry for something more. They've obviously had a long-term plan in play. Do pre-med, go to med school, then do a residency somewhere. Work closely with bodies and see if that satisfies the urge. We know, because we've got the foreknowledge, we know it's a vain hope and it won't work, but you can understand Harry wanting to cling to it as long as possible. You can see on Dexter's face he's sceptical. And we get another music drop. There are a lot of them this episode, all songs from the period. I love this one, Freedom by George Michael. Great song from a great album. But this is something they've not done to this degree before. Did they ever do it in the original series? I think I can remember one. Was it that song, Make Your Own Kind of Music? In season 8, possibly. Or am I misremembering? Yeah. I certainly remember the excellent original score during the original series. We had a song or two in New Blood, but this many music drops is unprecedented. All part of the vibe of the new show, but I think they need to be careful not to overdo it. We do get a nice score by Pat Irwin. Coming back, he did the score for New Blood, and he's doing riffs on many of the familiar Dexter musical motifs. I like an occasional song inserted, but I do love the score. Next day, we get the meeting of two great minds when Dexter and Masuka meet for the first time. It's some kind of career fair at the university. I noticed one of the stalls was for the Lehman Brothers, a nod to the director of the episode. There may have been other Easter eggs in the scene, but I couldn't spot any. The photos on the Miami Metro forensics stand, I wondered if any of those are images from the original series, perhaps from crime scenes depicted. Anyway, Masuka's giggle is the first thing we hear, and he nails it. His behaviour, though, wow. Oh, God, he's representing a serious police department, and he's totally unleashed, leching at the girls, making innuendos, pretty much the Masuka we know, and as this is set in 1991, totally unrestrained by any modern-day social standards. Would we expect him to be any other way, though, even today? Dexter, though, is captivated by the crime scene photos and tries to start conversation, dropping his dad's name, who we know Masuka works with, but it falls on deaf ears as he's still leering at the girls. Dexter displays an uncanny sixth sense for blood spatter right from the get-go, noticing a similarity with a couple of the photos, asking if they're the same killer. Masuka dismisses it, making a remark about Dexter cock-blocking him. Pretty rude, to be honest, when he's there to encourage people's interest in forensics. Well, I guess that was the official line. And Masuka maybe volunteered, turning up for a day perving at female students. Oh, bless him. We make our first visit to Miami Metro as Captain Spencer's talking to the troops about a series of home invasions with 8 dead, including 2 children. He's really animated, using some derogatory female language that wouldn't sit in 2024, but he's mad and wants progress. I love that he's addressing a room full of men, but it's Tanya Martin who comes in with a lead from the print they got at the earlier crime scene. They have a suspect, and he looks like a big fella, to quote Fargo. Again, they use the scene transition trick of fading from the guy's mugshot to the same guy in the shower singing to Vanilla Ice. Yep, another song drop. I loved Harry suggesting that SWAT check whether the door's unlocked before they just bust it down. A little finesse goes a long way, and also allows them to enter the house quietly. But I just get the feeling this guy's going to walk free. I wonder if it'll turn out they forgot to read him his rights, something like that. Cut to Dexter in his room at home, and I love this. Really love this touch. He's got the Penthouse magazine, and he's hidden his serial killer newspaper clippings inside, like having porn under his bed is acceptable to have discovered, but he hides the stuff about Ted Bundy and BTK. But it's this stuff that is his porn. I'm not suggesting he's doing the you-know-what while looking at an artist's sketch of the Zodiac Killer. Far from it, but it's this stuff that gets his heart pumping. It's like a who's who. These are his rock stars, and he wonders if he'll get his own nickname one day. Oh, he'll have his wish granted, Mr. Bay Harbour Butcher. Deb catches him looking and has a good line.
It's not what you think.
How about you shove that nudie magazine underneath your pillow and join me in the real world where real women with real tits actually exist?
When Dad says so.
Who knows? You might even meet someone and have fun.
I have fun.
Choking your chicken doesn't count. Come on, you're driving, I'm drinking.
The party sequence is great. Dexter's a fish out of water. A very drunk girl grabs him, sticks her tongue in his mouth and then puts his hand on her boob and grabs his crotch. She certainly doesn't get the reaction she expected and wonders if he's gay. He thinks fast with his reply though. I loved his comment about the place being unsanitary. Places like that do look nuts when you're sober, don't they? We see a very human response from Dexter though when he hears from Deb's friend Sophia that she's locked in a room with a guy and she's very drunk. Dexter immediately becomes the protector and rushes to rescue her. His reaction ended up being pretty extreme, but it was great that his first response was to help her. He's got some good moves, but did anyone think that guy was getting stabbed? I didn't think it would happen, but Dexter reaching for it, it was like reaching for the knife. It was like slow motion. You can hear sort of whispers, voices, like the knife's calling to him, or his dark passenger pushing him. His instinct to protect his sister dropped away and was replaced by the instinct to kill. Maybe there was a little hesitation. He didn't just immediately grab the knife, like part of him was saying no, or maybe part of him was just considering if this is what he needs. But then it's Deb's turn to rescue him. Let's face it, if he'd stabbed the guy, that would have been life over for Dexter, so well done, Deb. Good bit of brother-sister having each other's backs. We know Deb was on the periphery of Harry's relationship with Dexter, and she quite probably resented it, her being the blood relation. But also, we know that Deb's fiercely loyal to those she cares about, and she jumped right in there to pull Dexter out. I don't think she had time to notice his hand reaching for a knife. He's lucky she wasn't too drunk to help. She's briefly mad at him for showing her up, but understood, and I think she was grateful when she realised that someone had been about to sexually assault her. They get home and Harry's waited up for them. That's a nice touch. He says he can't rest unless everyone's home. That resonated with me as a parent, but it also reminded me of my own parents. My mum always said that she could never fully relax until everyone was at home in the evening. My wife's the same with our kids. For Harry, we can see how anxious he was about them both. For different reasons. Dexter speaks nicely to him, but covering for Deb and hiding his busted knuckles. Then comes our first big revelation of the series, and I did not see it coming. Who knew Harry and Doris had lost a son? At first, I thought we were seeing young Dexter in the pool, but no, this was the Morgans' birth son, Deb's older brother. When he calls out, Harry calls him Junior, so I don't know if he's called Harry Junior. I guess we may find out a name later on. But there's Harry drinking and smoking and watching the game while his son drowns in the pool. It's tragic, and in that moment my opinion of Harry softened. Anyone who's listened to the more recent podcasts, I've given him a bit of a hard time because what he did to Dexter, supporting him to be a more efficient killer and teaching him how to stay off the radar, that seemed like a form of child abuse to me. It felt like Dexter had these struggles but was almost groomed into writing himself off as a monster. Forgive the name drop, but I brought it up with Scott Reynolds before, and he said the writer's room recognised all the misguided parenting Harry did and that he came across as a bad father at the end of the day. I wonder if this is them trying to correct this opinion we have of him. They do have a chance here to develop him extensively and show us much more of the man he was, and this tragic event really shapes his motivation moving forward. And although helping your adopted son to kill people and get away with it is morally reprehensible, I can perfectly see why he was dedicated to protecting his son, this other son, at all costs. He'd lost one son, blamed himself. He'd lost his wife who he'd cheated on. The man is racked with guilt, and all that smoking, drinking, junk food, it's a coping mechanism. And then the pressure and stress of simply raising 2 kids on his own. A teenage daughter experimenting with alcohol, and boys. And then Dexter. No wonder he had a heart attack. But all this makes me far more understanding of why he did what he did with Dexter. We see later when he cries after hearing about Mary. The dam breaks. Tipping point is reached. The point of no return, and he breaks down. We see through this episode he's tried everything else in the hope that something will suffice and prevent Dexter having to kill a human, but at its base level, he's a parent doing anything he possibly can to protect his son. He's not an officer of the law here. He's behaving just as a grieving parent. What parent wouldn't lay down their life to protect their offspring? Harry lost one child through his negligence. He's not going to lose another. The heavy burden he must feel knowing he's got such a traumatised young man here. And he's been responsible for his upbringing, guiding him, preparing him for life, like any parent. But this weight of knowing his son may end up a killer, wow, I just can't imagine how heavy that must have weighed on him. No wonder he's still smoking and drinking, despite the impact on his health. It's a coping mechanism, not to mention what he sees when he's at work, all that death and suffering. He's got no respite.
Hey, bud, where are you? Dolphins are about to score. Hey, Junior. Junior. Jesus! Fuck! Help! Somebody! Help!
This is perhaps one of the great opportunities that this series presents. It gives the writers a big chance to flesh out characters like Harry and help us understand him so much more. We see Dexter and Harry doing one of the things Harry hopes will keep Dexter from needing to kill someone. We got a glimpse of this in the trailer, the 2 of them out hunting. Harry's still holding some vain hope that killing an animal will be enough, but Dexter knows it's not enough. Harry's in denial, denying what he knows deep down to be true, and he's tried to put it off as long as possible.
Dad, these hunting trips don't work for me anymore.
What do you mean?
Animals aren't enough. These feelings I have, I can't ignore them.
No, it's too soon.
You taught me the code to help me channel my urges. What's the point if I can't even use it?
Killing a person. It's not that simple. Once you do it, it can't be undone.
I almost did.
What?
Kill someone.
And there's mention of the code. So we know Harry's already taught Dexter a code of sorts. Is it the same code we always knew, or an early version of it? I wonder if it's different because it won't have been about killing humans, not yet. Harry's not outwardly resigned to that yet, although I think underneath he probably knows it's inevitable. Dexter tells him about the guy at the party. It shouldn't have made me smile, but Patrick has his wig on and it looks a little goofy. I've not mentioned his hair yet. It's not as silly perhaps as the one they made Michael wear in those early flashbacks, but I was glad when he got his hair cut before the end. Anyway, Harry has his heart attack, and I'm not surprised, but it did make me wonder if we were about to get into Nurse Mary. I'd not seen a synopsis for the episode or cast list, so I wasn't spoiled ahead of time, and sure enough, we get Dexter's first kill in this opening episode. This one sure seems to be moving fast, but I like that we're getting Mary done early on, so we can get into more new stuff sooner. In the hospital waiting room, Molly again does a good job invoking Jennifer with her delivery and body language, chewing Dexter out for eating at a time like this. I like the conversation with the doctor when Harry told off Deb for her language, and then the doctor drops the F-bomb too. Quit fucking smoking, pardon my French, and Deb says, your French is excellent. I like that. Harry's got to adjust his lifestyle choices, something he's going to find difficult. Like I was saying about these things being a coping mechanism, things that bring him some comfort. Like how some people smoke or comfort eat when they're stressed. There's a scene with Deb and Dex eating what looks like a takeaway junk food meal. Dex offers to go to Deb's volleyball game because he says they need to support each other. Deb gives a glance to the two empty chairs at the table. Mother and father both missing. I found it an emotional scene. In fact, I found a lot of Deb emotional this episode. She's such a tragic figure in the end, and we know how it'll go for her, never finding true happiness. I've always thought of her as the true heart of the show, and it's heartbreaking how it panned out for her. I look at teenage Deb here, stuck at home with her adopted brother, who I'm sure she loves, but she knows she's on the edge of things while her dad is so closely tied to him. They spend so much time together, it's like she's on the outside looking in. She gets overwhelmed and empties the fridge of junk food, and all she wants is a cuddle from her brother. She hugs him, but he can't hold her back. He doesn't. Just so fucking useless. This poor girl, she's so young and has experienced the loss of her mum, and now has to consider her dad's mortality, his failing health. We know Dexter gets a bit better at supporting her in the future, but for now, he's as much use as a chocolate fireguard.
Deb, look at yourself. You're lost.
I am not lost. I know exactly where I am. I am in some shitty fucking hell, which is exactly what I deserve. You are lost.
This is the Dissecting Dexter podcast.
Now we get on to Nurse Mary. We see her giving Harry injections, and Dexter catches her smirking as she comforts a bereaved relative in another room. That sixth sense of his starts to twitch as he smells something's off here. Dexter always had a knack at sniffing out the rotten apples, and we see he had that instinct at a young age. He notices the cut-out obituary in the newspaper and finds her scrapbook of cuttings, and he knows he's found a serial killer, a fellow traveller, as he puts it. We know the basics about Nurse Mary from the original series, and it's good to see more detail here. He does some canny detective work, working out how she kills her victims and stays undetected, at least until now, but she won't have crossed paths with anyone like Dexter before. We see Dexter walking purposefully down the hospital corridor, and his face, you can see the excitement on his face, the anticipation. He's made up his mind that she will be his first. In voiceover, though, he's admitting that he'll have to manipulate Harry. Killing her needs to be his idea. We know Dexter of old was a master manipulator, like all the best sociopaths, pulling people's strings for their own agenda. Morally, completely wrong, but he doesn't think like that. He's done the right thing before now, indulging Harry with his ideas for holding off the hunger, hunting animals, handling cadavers at university. None of it worked. He knows what he needs, and he's going to get it. Harry must have wondered why he wasn't getting better after that first doctor said he should be home by the end of the week. Dexter tells him about the nurse, and Harry tells him to stop her. She's not happy about not giving the injection. That's her own little ritual disrupted. Her need unfulfilled. The look that she gives him. Oh, it's a dark one. If looks could kill. Oh. But Harry saw the look too, and he must have known. Harry seems almost impressed, or at least surprised, that Dexter could tell what she was. Something clicks inside him, and he gives Dexter his orders to stop her. This is a bit different to how it was presented in the original series in the episode Popping Cherry. In that version of the story, it was Harry who realised he was slowly being poisoned, not Dexter. But the end result is the same. He greenlights Dexter to kill her. We see Dexter preparing the kill room, Nurse Mary's living room, struggling to hang the plastic. It's his first time, and it's nice to see the imperfections in his routine. He knows to cover the place, though, make sure there's no evidence for the police to find. He wears the plastic overalls. Mary comes home singing John Denver, and the takedown is very messy. No shot of M99. It's a full-on struggle before a punch to the nose knocks her out. Very clumsy, but gets the job done. I must admit, I found this bit disturbing, and perhaps we're supposed to. A young man throwing a woman around a room and beating her unconscious. It's horrible. We should never forget what Dexter is. As much as we enjoy his muddled attempts to function as a regular person, and his positioning in the show as the hero figure, he's a killer, and a fledgling one here. Dexter's first kill table is juxtaposed with Deb playing a blinder in her volleyball game. Bless her. She reserves a seat for her brother who never turns up, and the reason? He's stabbing a woman to death. Incidentally, I like his internal comment about his first time being with an older woman. That dark humour's still there. But let's have a listen to the mostly one-sided conversation.
I've been looking through your photo album. So many wonderful memories. I hope you don't mind. Are all your victims in here? Let me help you with that. Scream again and lose a tongue.
I helped them. I took their pain away.
They didn't ask you to do that.
They didn't have to. These goddamn people. Drinking and smoking until their hearts give out. Slaves to their own compulsions. Just like your father.
I already lost my mother. Harry's all I've got, and you tried to take him away from me.
That was the first time I ever felt someone else's fear. And I liked it.
So he's getting the feels that he was lacking with everything else he'd tried with Harry. Didn't you think Dexter sounded like a child when he spoke about the album? Really nice touch with the performance, almost like he respected her work. I don't know if that was Patrick's choice or the director. Anyway, they continue to edit the kill with Deb's game, where the commentator yells, "It's Morgan for the kill!" as Dexter drives the knife into Mary. You can't quite see his expression as he's got his hood, his plastic hood, drawn tight round his face like Kenny from South Park, but he watches the blood pour from his victim with what looks like curious fascination. The blood theme kicks in, which you know I love. But they cut away pretty fast, and we don't get to see Dexter properly react in the moment. I wanted to see him savour it, feel the ecstasy that he's craved. That's possibly my biggest complaint about the episode. This is such a huge, monumental, life-defining moment. I really think they needed to linger on it for longer. Anyway, they don't, and we move on to follow Dexter disposing of the body. Deep in the swamps, he feeds her to the alligators. Not a bad way to do it, and obviously we saw him do it like this in the original series, but obviously he's going to have to change to a boat at some point. Maybe we'll see that this season. No blood slides, but he keeps Mary's earrings, which in voiceover Dexter says will be a terrible mistake. Obviously, having trophies is a failing of many serial killers and ties them directly to each victim. And like changing his method of disposal, we know at some point he'll change to blood slides. Still a trophy though, and no less incriminating. Driving home next morning, we see him smiling, satisfied, at least for now. He finds his home surrounded by police though, but it's Harry's colleagues who've rallied round and brought a load of food to help them out. Spencer's here, a lot more amiable than we saw him earlier. He was pretty bullish before, and I wasn't sure if I found it irritating. Although I like Patrick Dempsey and his porn moustache. But Spencer's probably no different to many of the police bosses we got in the 90s in buddy cop or action movies. You know what I mean, the grumpy chief who gets mad at our protagonists, barking orders, telling them to do things by the book. Batista, Spencer and Bobby greet Dexter, and we learn that Bobby is Deb's godfather, something we didn't know before. Tanya and Masuka turn up too. Masuka remembers him from the job fair. Turns out they were impressed with his skills linking those crime scene photos. And Tanya offers him a job as an intern. We get another giggle from Masuka, and I have to say, I hope they don't overdo it with that. Use it sparingly, please. Could be annoying if they deploy it too often. Deb comes home to find Dexter stuffing his face with muffins. She's understandably pissed off that he missed her game that he'd promised he'd be at. She's also not impressed that nearly all the food is junk and starts to throw it out. I like Dexter looking at his watch and suddenly remembering that it's graduation day. Of course, he sat quietly while everyone else throws their mortarboards in the air. Just as he thinks he's alone, Deb shows up, not letting him down, and she gives him a hug, and he eventually hugs her back. Her dialogue here is just perfect Deb. So sweet. In voiceover, he says, so it was always about family, something that resonates with us who've seen the entire series. They collect Harry from hospital, and again, Deb's so sweet. She's so happy to have her dad back. But Harry and Dexter are exchanging looks. Harry knowing Dexter killed Nurse Mary. What's going through his head? When they get home, they have a chat about it.
The nurse. No witnesses?
None. And most importantly, she'll never hurt anyone again.
What did you do with the body?
She'll never be found.
What did you do with it?
I wrapped her up, stuck her in the back of the pickup, and drove out to Interstate 75.
Alligator Alley.
I dropped her in a batch of hungry gators, and she was gone in seconds. And there's literally nothing to worry about because there's literally nothing left of her.
How did it feel?
It felt right.
Good night, son. I'll see you in the morning.
Good night, Dad.
Change was never easy for Harry.
Do you think Harry was hoping for a different answer? Was he hoping Dexter would express some sorrow or regret, maybe realising that this isn't the path he wants to follow? No, Dexter thought it was right. right for justice and the potential victims he's saved, but most importantly, right for him. And for Harry, that was the kicker. He looked dismayed as he contemplated what had become of his son. He looks to the photo of him and younger Dexter, maybe thinking back to a simpler time when his hopes for Dexter concerned whether he'd one day make the school football team or what job he might do when he's older. Instead, he's having to deal with the reality that despite his best efforts, he's become a murderer. He breaks down in tears. And it's a really sad moment that underlines what we were talking about earlier. The episode closes out with Dexter exiting the familiar elevator, Harry by his side, expressing some concern that he's starting on a career path with the police department, and we enter our familiar Miami Metro office, and what a delight. Isn't it good to be home? Harry gets a lovely warm welcome from his colleagues, familiar names and soon to be very familiar faces. Our old friend Camilla is among them. Dexter notes how popular he is and how he isn't. Then he makes his way into what will become his office for the next 20 or so years. And it's a wonderful moment as familiar original series music kicks in. He gets a welcome from Masuka and Tanya. Sarah Michelle Gellar has been good this episode, but I thought Alex Shimizu did a good job with his delivery in this scene, channeling OG Vince, and Dexter takes his place in what will become his workplace. Sitting in the swivel chair and spinning around just like we saw Michael do so many times before, a thin smile on his face, wondering what's to come, and maybe thinking about the opportunities that could come his way.
This is the Dissecting Dexter podcast.
It doesn't matter what I do. Born in blood. Both of us.
You'll have already worked out that I enjoyed this episode. It's safe to say it really exceeded my expectations. Michael's presence helped, but the show didn't depend on it. His voiceovers complemented the action well, though. They were mostly pitched nicely with the dark humour we've come to expect, and they weren't overused. The episode moved at a quick pace. Lots seemed to happen. We've had the revelation about the Morgan's first child, which really puts Harry in a new light, and we've talked about that a lot already today. We don't yet know if Deb or Dexter knew about that, or know about that, and maybe they never will, but it really adds to the burden that weighs on Harry and informs what he does down the road. The knowledge that he failed to save 2 sons. Wow. I really enjoyed Christian Slater as Harry. He's got presence. He looked the part, and I thought his performance was strong. Molly Brown as Deb was a lovely surprise. She has the ability to project the impression of a tough exterior, but still showed that insecurity and vulnerability. Some of her mannerisms and cadence were spot on, but at the same time, I didn't feel like she was trying to mimic Jennifer Carpenter specifically. Patrick Gibson, well, I think I'm on board the Paddy train. Like Molly, I didn't feel he was trying to mimic the original actor, but he was doing a good job with the pitch and tone of his dialogue. His body language was good, and he nailed a few of the dark looks and wry smiles. We'll talk about him as the season goes on, but the early signs are good. The rest of the cast were fine. I didn't find anyone's performance below par or substandard. I don't want Spencer to become the cliché gruff police boss, but that's not Patrick Dempsey's fault. He's charismatic and looks good in the role. And Masuka, I hope they don't overdo his giggle. I already feel like he did it once too many times this episode, and I don't want him to become annoying. I got emotional more than once. Usually with scenes involving Deb, I've mentioned this a bit already, I couldn't help but look at her and think about what's to come for her. We already know she's destined to be a tragic figure who never finds true peace and happiness, and that's heartbreaking. I love the character. Overall, this was a very promising and encouraging start to the series, and I'm in. But what did you guys think about it?
Listener feedback.
As always, you can email me at dissectingdexter@gmail.com, where you could also send a voicemail. We've got some of those coming up. You can also reach out via Facebook, facebook.com/dissectingdexter. I'm also on Twitter at dissectdexter, or Blue Sky, search for Dissecting Dexter. Let's waste no time and get straight into the first bit of feedback. And it's the first bit of feedback I received after the episode. It's from Mamoon Rashid. He says, at the start of the episode, it didn't really feel like Dexter at all, with VFX and so much music after every transition. Just didn't feel like Dexter. Also, the sound design and colour grading felt too clean, but as the episode went on, it grew on me, and I saw the traces of original show in it. By the end, it got me excited for episodes to come. I'm doing what you always say, trust the show. One big thing I want to point out or ask, was the nurse kill a retcon? Because I remember in the original series, Harry is the one who tells Dexter that nurse is giving morphine and killing patients, but in Original Sin it's Dexter who finds out. Just something I noticed. Thanks, Mamoon. Good to have you with us. You're right about Mary. We talked about this during my review. They did make a change to how they found out she was killing patients. I'm glad you enjoyed it, and I'm happy you remember our old mantra, trust the show.
So, Dissecting Dexter. You always remember your first time, or your second, or your third when it comes to Dexter. Dexter Original Sin is the show we didn't know we wanted, didn't know that we needed, but I am personally glad that we have it. I've come to the realisation that I am much happier having Dexter in my life, and this new take on it for me is something that I enjoyed a lot more than I thought I would. I want to keep this really positive. There are a few wee nitpicky things that I could talk about, and I don't want it to be too long. First of all, it's great to have you back, Gareth. I enjoyed this season 3 rewatch. I really liked that we are flashing through Dexter's life and we're hearing Michael C. Hall narrate it, but we're also having the duality of seeing the story about Harry, about Deb, and I think we'll learn more about the characters, when the other characters such as LaGuerta, etc., when we move into the show. I think we're almost seeing two stories. Dexter, could still be an unreliable narrator, but we're also seeing a lot more about the other characters, and that for me is really interesting as well. It was pretty mind-blowing what happened to Harry in the first episode. I think the cast is great. I wasn't so sure about the characters playing Deb and Dexter, but I think they did a great job. And I'm really looking forward to seeing where they go. I think this is a fresh take, although it's sort of retreading some of the things we already know. They're going to flesh out and give us so much more. And I think opening up and definitively telling us that Dexter's alive, putting an end to any sort of speculation that he'll be Harrison's dark passenger, etc., for me is great. I liked New Blood, as we've spoken about before. Wasn't thrilled with how it ended, more so on how quickly we got there, but I think we can sort of put that to bed now. We can enjoy Dexter Original Sin for what it is, and we can look forward to Dexter Resurrections next year as well. Really looking forward to your take on things, Gareth, and everyone else who contributes to Dissecting Dexter. It's good to be back.
Thanks, Chris. That's a great voicemail. Your thoughts really do align with my own. This is the show we didn't know we wanted or needed, but I'm also really glad it's here. I had such a warm feeling watching it, a warm, fuzzy feeling. I got emotional, as I said, and for me that's so important. Not necessarily getting misty-eyed, but I just want my TV or film to make me feel. And this certainly did that. I'm looking forward to hearing more of what you think as the season goes on. Thanks, Chris. Okay, we go from a listener who really enjoyed it to someone who did not. Michael emailed to say, unfortunately, this show is terrible. They are really trying to imitate the original show, down to all of the characters' mannerisms, acting styles and clothing. Even the plot of the first episode is pulled from a flashback from season 1 of the original show, and they reshot multiple scenes with the new cast. It's so weird. Also, the writing is awful. That prologue completely removes all the impact from the end of New Blood. Thanks, Michael. I'm certainly not going to invalidate your feelings, as your opinion is as valid as anyone else's. I'm just sorry you didn't like it. Are you going to stick around to see how things pan out, I wonder? I don't mind a flashback within a flashback, but you could make a very, very valid argument that this show is Dexter telling his story, but we see a flashback of Harry's first son drowning. If that's something Dexter didn't ever know about, then the concept of the whole series of Original Sin breaks, doesn't it? I'm willing to let it go, though. If this terrible thing happened to Harry, then it's important that we know as viewers, and it's given us so much to think about for Harry as a character. It really does reframe his motivation for doing what he did with Dexter, even if it's still morally wrong. You mentioned about imitating some of the characters' mannerisms, acting styles and clothing. I think they kind of need to do that, don't they? Because it's set in the same time period as the flashbacks that we saw in the original series. These are the same people. We've talked a bit, and we'll talk shortly with some other feedback about how they switched Deb's styling from flashbacks we saw in the original series to what we've got now, and that's coming up. But these are the same people, aren't they? So I think copying things like some of the mannerisms, I think that's okay. These shouldn't seem like strangers to us, should they? There should be some familiarity here, even though we've got new faces in the roles. You mentioned the prologue. Obviously, it does pull the rug out from under us. I can't remember if you liked the ending of New Blood. Plenty did, but plenty didn't. I, as listeners will know, I thought it was a poetic ending to the character, even if he didn't end up facing the consequences of the justice system. Although, wouldn't it be funny if he got off on a technicality? Hey, maybe that's what's in store for Resurrection. But yes, it does remove the impact of the ending of New Blood, and I'm torn about that because it hit home for me. But at the same time, I love this character, and like Chris just said, I'm happier with him in my life than not. Thanks for your email, Michael. I hope you might stick around, and even if you continue to not really enjoy the series, maybe your thoughts will provide some interesting balance on the podcast. It's really good to have differing views, and I welcome anything else you have to say about it. Speaking of which, here's something completely different.
Gareth, this is it. No more Dexter. Alright. He died at the end. We're never going to get to dissect another episode. Travis, arise. Michael C. Hall's Emo Dad rock band is not embarrassing, and they are definitely going places. There is more Dexter to dissect. You must arise.
Fuck Harrison. Oh, what year is it? Oh God, where am I? What time is it? Oh fuck, I gotta dissect Original Sin with Gareth.
And we're back with Original Sin. Hey, holla. It definitely wasn't perfect, but I was actually really into it. The first thing that comes to mind, I'm a negative person, I guess, but there's at times where the show seems a little cheap from like a production standpoint. I still believe that the entirety of Michael C. Hall's involvement was added late in production. The opening with grown-up Dexter looks and kind of feels like it was shot on the cheap and tacked on after the fact. Among other things, part of the evidence I'll use to support that claim is that the very first thing Dexter apparently remembers is being born, like straight out of his mama's vagina, Okay. All the exteriors in that sequence with Dexter are clearly like CGI composites. Dexter has that line like, a beating heart, I'll take it. Great line. Very funny. Very original Dexter. I shouldn't complain, but tonally, it's not consistent with like the state of mind that we left Dexter in when we last saw him. Even the career fair that Dexter ends up going to, where he meets Masuka for the first time, it looks a little cheap. Like, this is supposed to be a career fair for like University of Miami, this big place in Miami. And it's like not in this big impressive college quad area. It's like in the dirt, really cramped, by the water, by the freeway exit. And it was a little cheap. And Dexter's going through his notebook, and for the life of me, I can't figure out what the reasoning behind this is. They have a real picture of Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, but then they have fake pictures of Ted Bundy. I don't know what's going on there. But anyway, I'm sure many people are going to point out Dexter's birthday is Michael C. Hall's real birthday. And I'm very happy that they made it so he graduated college in 1991. Now, which would mean he was 20 years old when he graduated college. Very impressive, not impossible. But this is a much better year for a milestone in Dexter's life than when previously in season 6 they said he graduated high school in 1991, which would make him 20 years old, a super senior in high school. A far cry from the boy genius we were led to believe he was. Something I can't help but point out, because I used to pride myself as a Dexter encyclopedia, and I know I'm not the only one who's going to tell you this, but they definitely took a lot of liberties in how they retold Dexter's origins as opposed to how we saw it originally in the original series. Everything with the Nurse Mary and Harry and whatnot, like the hospital room was all wrong. It was way too friggin' bright. All the dialogue that they spoke, most of it, 80-90% of it was different than how we had seen it before. Harry was supposed to be the one to figure out that the nurse was a killer. The nurse's apartment was all wrong. She had no cat, which was like a highlight of the original scene, that the unaffected cat just watching her owner, or his owner, get murdered. Dexter let her scream for some reason. In the original scene, Dexter warns her, hey, don't scream. I'm going to take the tape out, or the stuff out of your mouth. Don't scream. And then she just lets her scream, and he lets her monologue. In the original scene, Dexter had a needle, but he was so kind of green and inept at what he was doing, he couldn't stick her, and he ended up having to, punch Denise Crosby into submission. Everyone's clothes are all wrong. Even young Deb is portrayed way different than she was originally. Gone are the long hair she had, the big old grandma glasses, and her really like needy daddy's girl demeanor. Now she's like a liberated young woman who doesn't need her father's approval to do anything. And now, actually, here's the shocker. None of these actually bother me at all. I kind of like the changes. I'm excited to see a new spin on stuff that I'm kind of familiar with, right? This must be what comic book fans feel like when they reboot Batman for the 100th time, I have many positives for the show. Shouts out to Pat Irwin, the new music person. A lot of the music was recycled from the previous show, but I loved the new music. There was new music, and it was all great. Shouts out to Pervy Masuka. They didn't tone Masuka down at all. He's still a perv. That's really great. Shouts out to the Happy Days theme song. I fucking love the Happy Days theme song. I wish they would have let that one rock go. They cut that off quick. Shouts out to this cartoon chomp sound effect, which they inexplicably played in the opening sequence of their flagship network prestige drama. Really out of place, and I'll be keeping an ear open to see if they remove it in future episodes. Shouts out to the new Dexter lore. Harry had a son before he even had Deb and knew Dexter, and he was neglectful, and the son presumably died on his watch. Previously, we believed that Harry's implication in Dexter's mother's death was the reason why he took Dexter under his wing, but now they're adding the kind of added layer that Dexter is some sort of replacement son. Though, I gotta point out, going back to the cheapness that I witnessed, if you go back and watch the scene outside the house when, Dexter's mother, or, Deb's real mother comes home, there's no body in the stretcher. There's no boy in the stretcher that the ambulance or that the EMTs have. There's no boy. There's no dummy. It's just wadded up blankets. A part of me feels like maybe they're setting some up. Oh, maybe they want us to think the son died, but he didn't. Because we didn't hear what Harry said. Part of me thinks that, but truly I think it was just hurried production. There's we don't have a dummy or whatever. Okay, we'll do our best. I think you just weren't supposed to notice. Also, coroners and EMT drive people, they don't drive hearses to the scenes of crimes or accidents or whatever. They drive ambulance trucks. Hearses are more like funeral home, but whatever. Anyway, we're not talking the negatives here. Shouts out to the new Nurse Mary actor. She looked very, very much like the old Tasha Yar. Shouts out to the line of the episode, which came from Deb. No wonder his heart tried to peace out. I can't tell if that line was supposed to be cute or not, but I loved it anyway. And finally, shouts out to Patrick Gibson. I really liked his performance in the Nurse Mary death scene. It was different than MCH's performance. Patrick Gibson really seemed kind of genuine and excited and couldn't wait to. He was like a child the way he was talking to her, and MCH was like a mouth breathing pervert. And both are effective in their own different ways. Sarah Michelle Gellar plays Tanya Martin, and she's described as the boss lady of forensics. But in the future, there's really no position like that. Dexter and Masuka, they're kind of they come off as equals, and they just report directly to LaGuerta. I'm curious about what's going to happen to her character, that position. Maybe when LaGuerta comes in, she'll eventually fire her or something. I don't know. It would seem to me like Patrick Dempsey's character could have maybe been Captain Matthews. They didn't make him that. They made him somebody else, so that for some reason makes me think Patrick Dempsey's character, there's something sinister planned for him. Because who the hell is this guy? They never talked about him. And where the hell is Matthews? Finally, I'm curious what they'll do with Dexter's hair. At the end of this episode, he got that much needed haircut. But when we see flashbacks in the original series, we see that young Dexter still has the long hair when he kills Juan Reynes, which is the person that Harry catches him killing, and then, Harry kills himself in response to. So, is our new Dexter just going to decide to grow his hair back? And if we go by the original show's lore, if they're going to stick with it, Harry's got less than a year to live at this point. So who knows what'll happen. Anyway, Gareth, I'm glad you're back. I'm glad the show's back. I'm ready for the fan service and the fun of the original Dexter again. Without all the baggage of Harrison and Hannah and Deb knowing. It can just be fun for a while. And, after the events of last month, we can all use a little fun right now.
Thanks so much, Travis. We sure could. Your comment about those first few shots of present-day Dexter are fair. They did look like a lot of CGI. I didn't allow myself to be taken out of it, though. I was just intrigued as to how much we'd see of Dexter in the present. You mentioned Dexter's off-the-cuff remark about a heartbeat. I'll take it. You're right. Good line from the perspective of original Dexter, but tonally, given what had just happened to him, should he be so flippant? Perhaps not. He was ready to die. You're not the only one to notice the differences in the whole Nurse Mary thing. We didn't see a cat, but we do hear her call out for Tinker when she gets home. We also see the cat in a photo on a desk at work. There are plenty of differences, though, and you can bet they discussed this in the writer's room, how closely to respect how it was portrayed in the original flashback. I think they did the right thing in doing it fresh, and I like how it played out. Dexter working it out for himself was a nice display of his instincts, how good he inherently was, even then, at sniffing out fellow travellers. You mentioned the styling differences, particularly Deb, who was originally portrayed very differently in the old flashbacks. Long hair, glasses, less fashionable. This will have surely been a big one when they planned the show, how to portray Deb in a full season of TV. What would be more dramatically interesting and effective? Someone nerdy to match Dexter, or someone more outgoing to act as a foil to the stiff, socially awkward Dexter? Again, I think they've gone the right way, and this more lively Deb is closer to the adult character we know and love. I'm so happy that you brought up the cartoon chomp sound effect. I noticed that too, and it made me smile. Hearing you describe it and include it in your message made me laugh out loud when I first heard it. Your observation about the body on the stretcher, or lack of, it did look like a bunch of blankets wrapped up and shaped to look like a small body. They certainly had a child dummy on set because they used it in the pool sequence, but maybe, I don't know, maybe this was shot on a different day and the dummy had gone back into storage. Some good speculation about Spencer and Tanya. Patrick Dempsey is in the opening credits, while Sarah Michelle was only in the credits as a guest star, so who knows what that means. Some differential for their respective contracts, maybe. In the opening titles, that implies a series regular. Matthews should be around somewhere, and you'd be surprised if we didn't meet him at some point. But for Tanya, does she get bumped off later in the season? Or does that happen to Spencer? It's fun to spitball, but their fates are very much open to the writer's imagination. Anything could happen to those two, and that creates stakes for the characters. We know the others survive, so there can't be any real jeopardy for them. Oh, with the exception of Bobby. Is there anyone else new that I've forgotten? Don't think so. Okay, thanks again, Travis, and thanks for your support on Patreon. Thanks ever so much. Moving on to another email. This one's from Patreon supporter, another Patreon supporter, Jennifer Pennington, who enjoyed the episode and says the Miami vibes made me feel so nostalgic for the first season of OG Dexter. The casting also is just top-notch. They really picked actors that are so similar to their OG counterparts. Also, all of the little Easter eggs and callbacks made it even more enjoyable. I think Patrick Gibson portrayed a young Dexter so well. Thanks for the podcast, Gareth. Love it. Thanks, Jennifer. I'm glad you enjoyed it. The early signs are good for the new cast, I think. I thought Patrick did well, and everyone really. There isn't anyone I don't like. Thanks again for emailing, and thanks so much for your support on Patreon. Moving on, Andrea got in touch via Facebook. She felt that the episode was a bit disjointed and a little boring because she knew about Nurse Mary. I can see why it might have come across a little disjointed. But she says it's exciting to be back in the world of Dexter. She goes on to say that the flashbacks were interesting, like Harry losing his son, which set up a more nuanced story about why he adopted Dexter. The birth flashbacks seemed unnecessary. Andrea says she's not sure what it added to the plot. She says, I found jumping around the timeline so disorienting, especially if you compare it to the New Blood pilot, which I find engaging and immersive no matter how many times I watch it. It's so cohesive and well structured. On a more positive note, I was pleasantly surprised by Slater's performance as Harry. There were only a few moments when his typical Slater voice took me out of it. I feel like he could have studied Remar's voice a bit more, like Gibson did Hall. That said, he is one of the most famous actors in the world, so he probably feels comfortable doing his own thing. Molly Brown is spot on as Deb, perfection. Patrick Gibson did as well as anyone could in his position. It's a monumental task to take on this role. I suppose it's also important to take into account he should not feel like the Dexter we know and love. He is evolving into that character, which I think there are glimpses of as he strolls into the precinct with his new haircut. The supporting cast is superb. I've heard people say some of the characters border on imitation. I adore their portrayals and can't wait for Miami Metro next week. I'm intrigued with how they will handle the less PC aspects of the 90s. For example, Dempsey addressing the fellas and using the term menopausal bitch, and Masuka offering up his 9-inch nail to a college student show that they won't hold back, which I think is the right path. I believe it is possible to depict the time as it was while finding narrative structures to critique. It could be interesting and might add to the cultural conversations about how to navigate these issues in TV and film. Thanks, Andrea. Great email. There seems to be a lot of love for this new cast, and that's great. If they're keeping an eye on fan reaction, I'm sure they'll all be happy at the response so far. We talked a bit about Spencer and Masuka in my review. They really shouldn't be toning down Masuka. If anything, he'd be more immature and unleashed at this younger age. And Spencer, using those sorts of terms. Yeah, like we said, this is a different time. PC wasn't a thing. We can expect more dialogue that wouldn't be so acceptable nowadays. And this is a good thing because they need to make it sound authentic for the time period. Thanks again, Andrea. Let's go to another voicemail now. This is from Nick Henderson.
Hey Gareth, Nick here. Let me just start by saying we're back. Original Sin has started, and every new season of Dexter is always made better by having a weekly episode of your podcast to listen to from week to week, so consider me super excited. This week, of course, marks the beginning of a new era of Dexter, but it also contains flashes of what's to come with Resurrection, which, by the way, is now rumored to be premiering in June, which is exciting. I had my own reservations about the decision to essentially retcon Dexter's death in New Blood. I still do, but I'd be lying if I didn't admit that seeing it officially unfold on screen this week wasn't exhilarating. I honestly love this book-ended approach they're taking to the story, and I think there's actually a lot of really creative storytelling potential there that's on the table now, so I'm excited to see where it goes. But anyways, I'm here to share some quick thoughts on the pilot episode of Original Sin. Quick shameless plug, I'll be continuing to publish my full reviews each week on DexterDaily.com for anyone who's interested. But, man, where do I begin? I guess I'll start by just saying I think this was a great episode overall, but personally it didn't quite reach the same heights or have the same impact as, say, the premiere episode of New Blood. At the end of the day, I think it just had way too much to accomplish in just 1 hour. With that said, I think it was mostly successful. It sold me on the new cast, it stayed faithful to the original series flashbacks, it teased some earth-shattering revelations about Harry's backstory, and then it took the time to set us up for Resurrection on top of all that, so I think it was really impressive. At the end of the day, though, I think this episode will likely be the one that we look back on as maybe the most familiar. We've all seen the Nurse Mary kill before. It was done way back in Season 1, Episode 3. So we've seen how it plays out, but it's one of those things that's like literally impossible for them to skip while doing a prequel. So with that out of the way now, I think they're free to explore completely new territory in the coming episodes. So really excited to see that where we go from here. Here's some highlights, some quick highlights for me from the episode. The autopsy, not only is that a great reintroduction to young Dexter, his demeanor as he gets ready to perform the autopsy in front of his class is very unsettling. In fact, I would say it was bordering on intimate, which is gross but appropriate for the character. And then there's the hilarious graduation photo and the Penthouse magazine with the serial killer clippings. It all just felt very much like they're serious about getting back to the dark humor of the original series, specifically the first 4 seasons. Then, of course, there's Michael C. Hall's narration. I was a little worried about this because I assumed there was going to be some huge disconnect between what I was seeing and what I was hearing on screen. But I think it actually works really well. And I think a part of that is because they shifted the perspective slightly, which I think was a really smart move. It sounds more like he's telling a story now rather than riffing on what's happening in the moment. And I think that works beautifully. The frat party. Seeing Dexter go from awkward to vengeful big brother when his sister was in danger was touching and disturbing at the same time, and for me, that's when the series has always shined, so it was really important to see that they're still able to get that right. The line, my favorite line of the episode is the one that sold me on Molly Brown as Deb. It was when the nurse said, "Pardon my French," and she replied, "Your French is perfect. Holy shit, that was amazing. I loved it. No notes." And lastly, the audio design that they implemented when Dexter put his hand on Mary's heart during the kill scene, and you could hear and feel her heart pounding. It was just perfect, man. I loved it. And I love that he described it as his first time experiencing another person's fear. Classic Dexter. But anyways, I could go on, but I'm going to let some other folks share their thoughts. We'll have plenty of opportunities to chat about this over the course of the season. I think it's off to a really strong start, and I think the fun really begins with the next episode. By the way, get ready because I've heard rumors that 2 new episodes are actually expected to drop this coming Friday instead of 1, and there'll be a week in the future that's going to be skipped. Not entirely sure if that's 100% accurate. I don't think it's official yet, but I think that it's looking likely. But anyways, keep up the great work, Gareth, and I'll be back next week. Cheers.
Thanks so much, Nick. Great thoughts, and echoing those of many fans at the moment. That was a great line from Deb. Your French is excellent. I did enjoy Harry chastising her for her language this episode, actually. He's in a no-win situation with that one, though, isn't he? And as Nick said, you can catch his further analysis at DexterDaily.com, which is a good website for news about the show in general. Finally, we have an email from Hans in Ohio. He starts by saying some kind things about me and the podcast, which I really appreciate. Before getting into the episode, he is optimistic that Original Sin won't repeat the pattern of what he thinks are bad endings to both Season 8 and New Blood, and was pleasantly surprised by this first episode. He says he likes the cast, although like me he was concerned about Patrick Gibson filling Michael's shoes. He likes him though, along with Slater. About Molly Brown he says, and I quote, "With Deb, I didn't think Molly Brown was a faithful representation, but I can't quite put my finger on why, yet. Knowing what I know about Deb in the original series with Jennifer Carpenter, I can't see her being the way Deb is portrayed in episode 1, as a sort of popular party sports girl, at least not from the flashbacks I remember of her as younger in the original series. It's a different vibe. Hopefully the actors playing Masuka and Batista will prove to do a good job. Those are tough shoes to fill and will need more than just a faithful representation of the looks and laughs. And I for one do not hope Masuka is toned down at all, even though I personally do not care for those kinds of people in real life. He needs to be portrayed accurately, and I hope they do it, even if it's just to stick to the PC police. Sorry, I'll read that again. Even if it's just to stick it to the PC police of this soft generation. The 90s were great because you could speak openly and honest and didn't need to walk on eggshells every time you spoke. You could tease your friends and call them names and nobody cried about it or got offended. You could get along with those who disagreed with you. How crazy, right? Even though the scene of Dexter's first kill was recreated, along with all that came with it, I still enjoyed the alternate, extended viewpoint of it. Great work overall. Bonus points for even flashing back to the 1970s. At first, they had me questioning myself when I heard the name Grease for the Dolphins. It would have been Dan Marino at quarterback in the early 90s. I'm very much looking forward to the rest of the season. It looks like they're going to get this prequel right, as good as it has started off. Thanks, Hans. Interesting you weren't as pleased with Molly as others were. But then we all look for different things. And it certainly is a different vibe to the young Deb we saw in flashbacks in the original series. And we've talked about that earlier in the feedback section. I liked her though, and hopefully you will grow to like her more too as the show goes on. And speaking of going on, I certainly have been, so let's look to wrap this up. This really has been a decent opening. I've pretty much covered what I thought about it, so I won't repeat, but I'm definitely excited for what's to come. As Nick said, we've got Nurse Mary in the bag, so we can move on to new ground now and really deep dive into Dexter's early time in forensics and his early time as a killer. The dark humour is very much there, and this is shaping up to be a really entertaining ride. Are you with me? Are you with me? I hope so. Thanks for everyone who sent in feedback, some really great comments there. Thank you to my wonderful Patreon supporters, and thanks to all of you for listening. We'll be back in a week, just before Christmas, to dissect some more Dexter together. Episode 2, which is called Kid in a Candy Store. Cheers everyone, bye for now.